Hey, this is Alan Gassman, and behind me to my left is a picture of Jerry Hesch, and also on your PowerPoint in front of you is a picture of Jerry Hesch. And due to technical issues, that's all you're going to see of Jerry Hesch today. But the good news is you're going to hear Jerry Hesch. How are you doing, Jerry?
Well, after trying to get my camera to work, I'm a little frustrated, but it doesn't matter. I didn't have to comb my hair.
Yeah, and you look better with that bow tie that we've got behind me there. So I think we're doing good. So this is a 1 hour presentation. It does not qualify for continuing education credit. And I like the crowd we draw. It's people who aren't here for the continuing education credit. Although a lot of my friends would be here if it was for the credit. But Jerry, I just don't think usually it's not good enough for the credit. And then for those of you who are new to this, I apologize because you probably aren't going to enjoy it at all. But if you stick around and you want to ask a question, you can go to that strange panel and click on the question, the upside down pyramid, which has mathematical qualities. And then you can type in your question. And if we know it, we'll answer it. And if we don't know the answer, we'll pretend not to see it. This is a continuing Saturday presentation series. And next Saturday on the 5th, I'm going to be joined at noon by a very, very brilliant lawyer who specializes in charitable planning. And Jerry, you don't know Carl Mill, but he's one of the best in the country for sure. And he's going to talk about charitable planning with cryptocurrency. And he'll also be just talking about cryptocurrency. He's very, very current with it. So we're looking forward to that. Saturday, and
Alan,
yes.
We just put a bunch of cryptocurrencies into a NIMCRUT, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's all income tax deferral. That's what it is.
Beautiful. Well, maybe you can join us next Saturday and talk to Carl about it.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay, Saturday the 12th, we'll be fielding all the questions and answers that you can send us, and then we'll make up some more. And then the 19th, I'm going to talk about QPERTs and S corporation stock planning. They have nothing to do with each other, but they're two topics that we just wanted to cover. Let me plug the Notre Dame Tax Institute. Please set your calendars for November 10 and 11 of this year. And Jerry, what do we need to know?
Well, in the last 2 years, it's been virtual. And a lot of people liked the fact that it was virtual because they didn't have to sit around for 8 hours all day and listen to the program. Because as part of the registration fee, we had recordings of all the sessions available on our website for 6 months. So a lot of people said, after sitting for 2 or 3 hours, I got interrupted and I knew that I could take care of stuff and I wouldn't miss anything. I'd like to say there's two things that are unique about Notre Dame. One is we have concurrent sessions, 2 sessions going on at once, because a lot of the programs where only 1 session at a time, some of the sessions you're interested in and some you're not. So what we try to do is schedule concurrent sessions so that there's high-end and more practical stuff, but so that therefore you don't have to listen to something you're not interested in. But if you're interested in both sessions, you listen to one live, and the recordings for the other are available at a later time. Next year, it's scheduled to be live in South Bend, Indiana. But come next May or June, depending upon what the current status of the country is, we will decide whether it's going to be live or virtual. But tentatively, it's scheduled to be live at this time.
And what I like best about the Institute is that Jerry reaches out to the very best speakers and the very best thinkers and ask them to do something new. When you go to the Notre Dame Tax Institute, you don't see the same thing that somebody said last year that they're going to say next year. When they speak for Jerry, they reach new heights, because I know from experience, whenever I've done speaking for Jerry, make sure you cover this, make sure you cover that. Oh, I hadn't even thought about that, Jerry. Thank you. And then he even sends you reference materials. So hope to see everybody at Notre Dame. We will be covering the Estate View software today. I'll make sure if we don't have time during the presentation, I'll talk about it at the end. And Jerry, we've made a couple of improvements to the software that you haven't seen yet. So I'm really looking forward to showing it to you. And again, those of you who are not familiar with this program, if you search Alan Gassman YouTube, you'll see a whole row across the top, and these are all the Saturday programs. So if you didn't see one, or you want to see one again, or you want to send your friends or your enemies to see these, that's fine. The second row across is all charitable presentations, and we're going to continue to add to these libraries, of course. Now, a few of the people, Jerry, who are joining us here today probably don't care that much about the federal estate tax. So I wanted to cover a few math rules that would apply for everyone. And Jerry, do you want to cover the rule of 72?
Oh, the rule of 72 is really, if you're going to save for your retirement or save for your child's college education, and you should always save through your child's college education by putting it into a 529 plan, because then none of the income is ever taxable. But the idea is, if I'm going to invest a certain dollar amount at a certain rate of return, I want to know after how many years what will be there. And the nice thing about a 529 plan is there's no income taxes. So if I basically can invest, say, $100,000 at 4% in a 529 plan, you can see that in 18 years, that 100,000 will double. So it gives you, and if you think you're going to do better than 4%, say 6%, it'll double in 12 years. So it's just a very nice way of getting a ballpark figure as how much you want to invest today, how it will grow to in the future. And to eliminate all state income taxes for saving for education, put it in a 529 plan.
And the rule of 72 is that you divide 72 by the interest rate, and that tells you how long it takes to double. So 7 divided by 72 is about 10. So, and I find that most of my clients have averaged a 7% rate of return on a conventional investment portfolio. So I'm expecting that their assets will double in 10 years, and they have a hard time believing that. I'll meet with a couple in their 60s, early 60s, and they have $10 million put away, and they're not concerned about estate tax. But I explain, unless you're going to spend it, it's going to be 20 million when you're in your 70s, and then it's going to be 40 million when you're in your 80s, and they just don't believe it. But that's more believable than the opposite. So that is the rule 72. The second thing I wanted to mention, and I always use this slide when I speak to new doctors and new lawyers, is the time value of money and starting early. And here it's very simple. Dr. A starts saving $100,000 a year at age 35 at a 6% rate of return, and Dr. B doesn't start until he's 40. And when Dr. B starts 5 years later, how much does he have to put in every year so that he can catch up with Dr. A in 25 years? And the answer is $143,352 every year. I mean, Dr. A puts in 100, he's good. Dr. B's got to huff and puff and save another $43,352 a year for 25 years because he started late. So this is a spreadsheet we can send you if you want to. Just say you want the start early spreadsheet, email us, and then we have a click up and down. But this is something to show a young professional. We showed it to our children, and they understood it. And the other thing I like to show clients is how important it is to save costs. There's, so many investment vehicles that cost 2 to 3% a year, and then there's others that cost 0.5% a year. And the investment vehicle that costs 2 to 3% a year, by my experience, rarely catches up or is able to make up for that loss. So you take the first person here, investing $100,000 a year for 11 years at 8% interest, versus $100,000 a year for 10 years at 7% interest. And the difference in the 11th year is $108,000. I mean, it's a whole year's savings just by a 1% swing. But look at this. In 20 years, the swing is $645,000. I mean, investor A has 5.4 million, investor B has 4.8 million. So I don't give investment advice, but I do ask my clients to understand what the cost of the investment is, or as Jerry says, what is the tax cost? If you have a portfolio that that you have to pay taxes on the interest and the dividends and the capital gains versus a 529 plan, which may have slightly more cost, but no income tax, then that can make a big difference. So Jerry, any comments on these math slides?
One of the things is someone says, I can't afford to put in $100,000 a year now. But the point is, how much can you afford? And they say, well, maybe 5 or 10,000. So I say, go ahead, start getting the compounding with the minimus amounts. And as you become more successful in the future, you can increase it. The key is to start the compounding as early as possible.
Right. Right. Now, a few CPA firms have used our NEST spreadsheet, and I developed this with my son when he was in undergraduate school, and we had a lot of fun with it. And, when I grew up, they had that game of life, and you spin the wheel or whatever it was, and all these things happen, and you see how much money you have at the end of the game of life. So I saw the spreadsheet that my own financial planner had used in the 1990s for Marcia and I came up with this as one spreadsheet. And the first column is, what do I need to retire? I want to know that answer. The second column is, what is my future home going to cost in adjusted dollars? The third column, what is the impact of a vacation home? The fourth column, what am I going to need for college? Fifth column, what am I going to need for a wedding or a bar mitzvah? And that is telling me my total needs. So if by age 68 and 71 in 20 years, this couple wants to have 6.2 million in retirement assets, they want a home that today is worth 750, but will probably be worth 1.5 million then, and they want a vacation home, their total need is 8.26 million. And if they go shopping at Saks and Neiman Marcus every week, they may not make that. So now where do they start? Well, you fill in, here's their present investments, which gives them a start. Here's their present house. Thank heaven they don't have a vacation house yet, because that wouldn't do them very good. Here's their debt situation and how their debt's going to be repaid. Here's their total resources. Here's what they need. And then how much do they need a year? How much will they have to put in a year, assuming these rates of return, in order to meet their needs? And then the client looks and goes, okay, and let's go back to the result page, because the result page here is, well, If you want to retire at 55 and you can assume a 6% rate of return, you better be saving 193,000 a year. If you get an 8% rate of return, you want to be saving 142,000 a year. If you want to wait till you're 60, you got to save less, and if you want to wait till you're 65, you got to save less. So do you really need the Bentley? And do you really need the big house? Because the big house creates a drag compared to when you put it in investments. So let's run some scenarios here, and let's go ahead and train the reptile brain while there's still time. So the inputs are pretty simple. You do have to know how to use Excel, but you can put these inputs in. And the other thing it will do for you is it'll give you a rough shot. How much insurance do I need? Well, you know, if you die in year 13 and we needed you to build up this much more in investments, you can't do it because you died, then we're going to need $440,000 of insurance in year 13, but looks like about $2 million now. So we call that the nest analysis. Now, someday, maybe I'll clean it up and put some arrows in it and actually make it a piece of software, but everyone's welcome to use it, and I hope that it's helpful.
Alan,
Jerry, any
go back to that last slide. How much insurance you need.
Okay.
In other words, people would say, if you die early, how much insurance you need. And you see in the first year, you need 1.9 million. And by year 15, you'll need 155,000. So what you need insurance for is just to cover the risk of dying early. And if all you need is to cover the risk of dying early, what is the cheapest product that you should do to do that, Alan?
Term life insurance.
Because whole life insurance is you're saving for money for something that you don't need. In other words, term insurance is just to cover the risk of dying early, and you don't need whole life, which builds up a death benefit for the future.
So Jerry, being a mathematician and a tax advisor and knowing the tax advantages of life insurance, basically being that cash value is never subject to income tax, at what point or under what circumstances is a permanent life insurance policy what people would say is a good investment?
Permanent life insurance, most people will say it's a wonderful tax-free death benefit when you die, and that's an income tax-free bequest to your children, or to pay estate taxes, or for whatever. However, a lot of people would say, I would love to access the investments in my insurance policy while I'm alive, before I die. And for that, you don't have term insurance, because that you have regular policies, whether it's whole life, variable, or universal, and that builds up a cash value that you can receive distributions from or borrow against. And when you receive a distribution, which is a return of your initial cost of your investment, that's tax-free. And if you borrow against the policy, that's also income tax-free. So if you're looking for a investment vehicle that can produce tax-free income to a limited extent for your retirement age in the future, you buy one of these policies that builds up tremendous cash value. But if you're going to build up tremendous cash value as an investment vehicle to access the funds income tax-free, you want to eliminate one of the most significant costs, which is the cost of the term insurance. And therefore, you don't want maximum death benefit, you want minimum death benefit. So on these whole life policies, they say, we always take the extra money that you earn and buy additional death benefit. Well, buying additional death benefit increases the term insurance costs. So if you're looking for an insurance policy that will provide a nice death benefit that you don't when you die, but to access it income tax free while the insured is alive, you want to minimize the death benefit. That means you can build up more in the investment portion.
Very good. Very good. And by the way, Jerry and I are tax lawyers, and Jerry is a tax professor. We don't sell any investment products whatsoever.
Yeah. One of the things that I always recommend is the insurance products, the different insurance products are so complicated, and they're intentionally so complicated so you really can't understand what's inside. So anytime somebody is recommending an insurance product to you, don't just rely on that one person. Basically, talk to somebody else. And there are lots of people out there who basically will evaluate the different insurance proposals for you. There's even a company that does this, Veritech. Remember Veritech?
Yeah, Jerry Flagg's company, Veralytic. If anyone wants information on Jerry Flagg, Flagg, or an introduction, just let me know. Now, I have a question here is how can I get 6% interest on my investments? Well, it wouldn't be 6% interest, that's for sure. The interest rates are much lower. But if you look at the last 65 years of stocks and bonds, and the last 10 years, and the last 20 years, and the last 30 years, you'll see about a 7 to 8% average rate of return on a conventional 30 to 35% bond or fixed income, 60 to 65% allocated equities portfolio. Marcia and I are using the same exact allocation that we started with in 1998, and we're just over 7% after all costs, which, you know, it's not a tremendous amount of money, but it's what I see clients having, and it feels pretty good that it doubles every year. So 10 years from now, it'll be twice as much as it is now if things go well. Okay,
Well,
go ahead, Jerry.
One word of caution. Past performance is nice as a predictor, but I always tell people that even though the projections will show over the last 20 years you can earn 7%, I always say, let us be more pessimistic and put in maybe 5% or 4%. Because that way, if it doesn't perform at 7%, you're not going to be disappointed. If it performs at better than better than the 4% you use for your predictions, it's a nice, pleasant surprise.
Right. And the other thing to point out is it's easy for me to say, yeah, we've gotten a 7% rate of return, but we've also had an average of 3% inflation. So our real rate of return after inflation has been 4%. But if you put it in a bond that only pays 1% and inflation continues at 3%, then you are actually coming out behind. Now, one person said, do you believe in a 3% rule or a 4% rule? And yeah, I generally tell my clients that based on the last 65 years of experience, if you die and leave your spouse 10 million, they would hope to invest it at 4%, and that should give them 400,000 a year. And if you have 2 million, that would get them 80,000 a year. And if you want them to have 100,000 a year and you're only going to leave them 2 million, then you better go ahead and get 500,000 of life insurance. And that's just a rule of thumb. As an estate planning lawyer, though, I want clients to walk out of my office knowing what Alan thinks they should do, so they have some sense of direction. They can certainly check with a better financial advisor and a licensed, qualified financial advisor and life insurance agent. But if you're an estate planning lawyer and you're sitting with your clients and you're not mentioning, by the way, if you die, your family won't have enough money. If you, to say, by the way, you should see a financial planner. That's good, but I think it's better to say, by the way, from the looks of this, if you die, your family's going to be out on the street. Get responsible. So, I just wanted to mention that also for people who are not concerned about the federal estate tax, there's plenty of math in the world of charitable giving. And Jerry is one of the leading experts on charitable giving and charitable remainder trusts, and I don't want to get into them today. I've given you some information, but I should have a slide here with some numbers just to play with the math. So some clients came to me and said, you know, we've got some nephews and nieces, and they're very dear to us, and we really don't know if they're good with money or not. And, you know, they go to the church with us. We see them at church, and they're on the church committees, and we'd like to give them something. I just had this idea. Well, why don't we give them each a charitable remainder trust for the benefit of the church? And they'll get a payment. If they manage it reasonably, they'll get a nice payment. And then at the end of a period of years, what's left will go to the church, and you'll get the recognition from the church for setting this up, and you'll get a little tax deduction. So for Kathy Jones here, age 40, we put $100,000 in a trust for her. She can get 6.92% of the value of that trust every year for the rest of her life. The clients are going to get a 10% tax deduction. And at the end of the term, the church is going to get what's left. Now, the alternative is if we went with a flat 20-year term, the month that we did this, then she could get 10.87% a year. So she might get, you know, the vast majority of the assets in the trust. She's got an obligation to manage it properly. She's got an obligation to file a tax return. She's got an obligation to write herself a check. But, and as you see, with her 50-year-old cousin would be able to get a 9.64% return for life, or if we do 20 years at 10.87%. So I call this the self-policing charitable remainder trust because they don't have to scold their nephews and nieces to do this right. The CPA is going to do that. And it doesn't have to be 100, 1,000, it could be 50,000, or it could be $1 million. Jerry, any comments or suggestions for that?
Yes. One of the problems is when we describe stuff in general and just show them the results, it can be a little bit confusing for the clients. So part of what we're doing today is more of how to communicate what seem to be technically difficult to understand techniques in an understandable manner. And what Alan and I are going to do in the remainder of the presentation today is show you how to communicate financially complex planning techniques in an understandable manner. And what we do is we use spreadsheets to show you what the result would be each and every year. So when the clients can visualize the actual impact each and every year, it becomes easier for them to understand how all these techniques work.
Right,
All right.
right. So, and by the way, just this is a nice cheat sheet for professionals on approximately what the payout percentage would be for life based upon somebody's age, or a 2-life payout, or even a 3-life payout. Now, we always go to Tiger Tables or Number Cruncher or one of the other commercial software programs to get these numbers, but it's at least good to you know, have these rules of thumb. So now to ease into my favorite tax, which is the federal estate tax, which is the least favorite tax of my clients. Maybe I should feel guilty. I don't know if oncologists wake up in the morning and say, boy, I'm glad cancer's out there, but I've enjoyed working with the estate tax and reducing it and curing it when we can. So this year, the exemption is at $12,060,000. So a single person can die and leave up to $12,060,000, assuming they've not done any large gifts in the past, and pay no federal estate tax. Now, last year, that got 2 senators close to going down to half. So it would have been $60,030,000 today. But Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema would not go along with that. So we're still at 12,060,000. It adjusts for what we call chained inflation every year. What is chained inflation? It's about 2/3 of the consumer price index. So if inflation is 3%, it goes up by about 2%. And I can gift up to $16,000 a year to each person that I like and dislike to reduce my estate. January 1st, 2026, it's coming down to 1/2 of what it will otherwise be, unless there's a president and a Senate and a House of Representatives that all agree otherwise. So if you're an optimist, or you don't care that much about your children and you have an $8 million estate and you don't think you'll get to 12 million, then you're either not worried at all because you're an optimist, or you're very worried because you're a pessimist. Life insurance, just like the income tax law, has some nice loopholes in the estate tax law. If I own life insurance or I control it and it's on my life and I die, it is in my estate, even if I don't own it. But if I put it into an irrevocable life insurance trust, which buys the policy fresh or owns the policy at least 3 years after I put it into the trust, then that policy can benefit my family after I die and will never be subject to federal estate tax. Now, if I die and I'm married, the normal arrangement is that the amount that passes estate tax free would go to what's called a bypass trust or a family trust, or it used to be called a B trust, which can benefit my spouse. My spouse can be the trustee. My spouse can get what my spouse needs for health, education, and maintenance. And whatever it grows to will never be subject to federal estate tax. But then on my spouse's death, what my spouse has will be subject to federal estate tax. So that's a very, very bird's eye view of the estate and gift tax. And Jerry, you teach estate and gift tax, and you've taught it for so many years at University of Miami, at Boston University. What have I left out? I mean, did I cover the whole course?
Well, the key, Alan, is if you try to do too many things at once and talk about too many aspects, is it can get confusing. And I found that every little thing you should do separately without talking about the other thing, and then tie them all together.
Right, right. So let me just mention, I've got a spreadsheet here. And Jerry, I don't know if you've seen this spreadsheet, but most of our viewers have. But this is just for your convenience. And what I'm showing here in green is the estate tax exemption amount of $12,060,000. And I have it growing at 2.5%, which is probably a pretty good estimate of what chained inflation might be. And then I'm showing what happens if it goes to half of that value in 2027. And then I'm showing what that's in yellow. And then in blue, I'm showing what almost happened last year and could happen if the Democrats take over the Senate. That would be going to half sooner. And then at column 6, I have you or your client. And right now, I'm showing a 7% rate of return on investments and a $6 million starting place. And I'm going to show you, this person is not earning any money or saving any money at all. So in year 10, she's going to be at 11 million. Still no problem if the exemption stays where it is, but a sizable problem in year 10 if it goes to half. So should she do planning? I mean, in my opinion, yes, but in her opinion, possibly not. But what you can do here, they call this an Allen-proof spreadsheet because I don't have to know anything. For example, if I want to show what would happen if she started with more, all I have to do is, oh, I'm sorry. If I want her to have more, I just click here. And as you see, I've moved her to 7 million. I can move her to 8 million. And then if I want to have a lower rate of return, more realistic, maybe 5.75%, I click there. And then she saves 25,000 a year, perhaps, or 30,000 a year. And she's going to work another 20 years. So now the numbers are different. So if you're working with a young adult and you want to say, look, you are starting with a net worth here of 0, but you should be able to save $100,000 a year at 7% if you're lucky, and you will be able to work for 40 years. So here is what we think you'll be. And if you keep your nose to the grindstone, then in 15 years, you'll be worth $2.2 million. But if you have to buy a lot of boats and cars and go to a lot of very expensive parties and weddings and give those parties and weddings, then you'll have less. So that's my first spreadsheet. Jerry, any comments on that?
No.
Okay. So then my second spreadsheet, just for everyone's convenience, is twice as much. So this would be for a married couple. Now it's very simplistic. This would assume that one spouse dies, leaves everything to the surviving spouse, then the surviving spouse keeps it. The surviving spouse, under the portability rules, so there's a new concept that Jerry teaches his students. If I die with a $12,060,000 exemption amount and I leave it all to Marcia and I don't use any of my exemption amount, then Marcia can take my exemption amount and add it to hers and have a $24,120,000 exemption. But if Marcia remarries and her new husband dies and doesn't leave an exemption, then she loses my portability allowance. And also my portability allowance does not grow with inflation. So, and my portability allowance cannot be used for what we call generation skipping planning. So it's better, in my opinion, for estate tax purposes at least, to fund that credit shelter trust on the first death. So that takes care of that slide. I'll move that out of the way. And then I have one more spreadsheet. And Jerry, here's another one that I don't think you've seen yet. And I'm going to divert our attention here to qualified personal residence trust. Let me see how I can drag that over too. All right, so Jerry, what I have here is a married couple, ages 70 and 75, and each spouse places half of a $1,900,000 home into an 8-year Cupert. And we use a 15% valuation discount because half of a home is not worth half of $1.9 million. So the first 8 years, and with a qualified personal residence trust, you put the house in. I'm oversimplifying here so that you can get the concept. My transfer of the house and Marcia's transfer of the house into the trust is a gift, but it's not a gift equal to the value of the house because the trust doesn't activate for my children for 8 years. Marcia and I have the right to use the house without paying any rent for 8 years. So we're able to take a discount. And this is the only asset I'm aware of that you can gift in this way and take this type of a discount. So I put the home in at $1.9 million, as you see there, and my estate tax exemption use for the two of us, Marcia and I together, is $961,000. So if we live the 8 years, we're getting $1.9 million asset out of our estate, and we're only using $961,000 of our estate tax exemption. So our estate tax savings is $660,000 if we die right at the end of the 8-year term. Now, if we're concerned that we'll die during the 8-year term, because then you don't have any of the tax savings, you get your exemption back, but you haven't had any savings, we could buy a 10-year term life insurance policy to make up for the tax savings that could be lost. But assuming that the house is growing at 3% a year and it's worth $2.4 million in year 9, now a nice thing happens, and the client goes, "You mean I have to pay rent to use the house?" Yes, and that's the best thing that could happen to you, because by paying rent, you're reducing your estate, and there's no income tax on the rent because of what we call the grantor trust rules. So at the end of year 10, the trust has not only the house, but it's got $290,000 in it from the rent paid and the rate of return on the reinvested rent. And after 15 years, the total value of the Cuperts are $4.4 million, and after 20 years, they're $6.2 million, and the estate tax savings is $2 million. Now, when you get the spreadsheet, you have to use a commercial program or hire somebody to tell you what number to use for the use of the exemption here in column 8. So Brandon plugged that in for me. But if you want to go ahead and make changes, for example, if you wanted to go with a higher home value, let's say the home starts at $2.2 million, and then therefore the exemption use is $1 million. And if you would like the Cupert term to be longer, let's say you go with a 12-year Cupert, and then as a result of that, you change the exemption use will be less. So you can run these scenarios and the spreadsheet will handle it. If you think your house is really going to go up in value by 4 or 5% because you live on the water, then you can go ahead and move that up. But then, Jerry, what I think you're really going to like about this, and what Brandon did, was the client said, well, what about the income tax? I'm not going to get a step up in basis when I die, am I? Well, Jerry, Brandon and I think there is a chance you get a step up on the death of the grantor of a grantor trust, but we understand that most people think that you don't, and eventually Congress will probably take that away for sure. So Brandon said, what is the income tax disadvantage if the children sell that house and there is no step up? So
Well,
here we show the income tax disadvantage.
Alan, there's another disadvantage. When the children get ownership of the house, they don't get the ability to exclude up to $500,000 of the gain from the sale of their principal residence.
Unless the children move in.
Right.
I mean, the parents get to use the $500,000 gain if it's sold while they're living there and while the trusts are grantor trusts.
Yeah, but what happens is if the parents, after the end of the term, rent it.
Well, then they could do a 1031 exchange. So, but there's plenty of discussion, but at least I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I wanted to just make the spreadsheet available. And anybody can go ahead and just get this spreadsheet, no charge, of course, just send us the email and ask for it if you didn't get it already. Okay, so now we want to talk about the estate tax savings. And I think it goes without saying, of course, that you can make annual gifts to save estate taxes. And I've got the Estate View software up here, and I just want to talk about the annual gifting because people don't do enough annual gifting. So I've got Dummy McPuppet here and Dummy spouse Shirley South. And they have $1 million residence, 13 million of investments. The residence is growing at 4.25%. They're spending 300,000 a year because they've retired. Their assets are growing at about 7% rate of return. And we're going to have the first spouse die in year 1, second spouse die in year 1. No, that's not it. Here we go. I go to no planning. I click there at no planning, and I have the first spouse dies in year 20. The house will be worth $2.3 million. Investments are worth $35 million at that time. Now the second spouse dies, and assuming the portability allowance, which would be about $25 million at the time or more, the estate tax is still going to be $18 million. Just to get a feel, now here's a married couple. They're in their 60s, 25-year life expectancy. They're not worried about estate tax, but maybe they should be. But they can fund a trust on the first death, the credit shelter trust, with up to $10,800,000. I know that because the computer tells me right there that's the maximum they can go based on this scenario. So I click on bypass trust there, and now I see that on Cal's death, $10.8 million goes to the bypass trust. So on the second death, that's grown to $15 million. Now the estate tax is down down to $11.980 million. So I went from $18.39 million to $11.980 million. But they have children, and they have 2 children and 2 grandchildren, and they haven't started gifting yet, but they will start gifting. And during their joint lifetime, they can gift 16 times 8. He can gift 4 times 16. She can gift 4 times 16. That starts out at over $200,000 a year. So I click here on annual gifting, and this really brings the estate tax down. Look at this. By annual gifting, the gift trust has $7 million in it in 20 years and $10,926,000 in 25 years. And one thing that Jerry wants me to mention is that this trust will not have to pay any income tax, because Cal and Shirley will pay the income tax if it's properly drafted, because it's what we call a grantor trust. The old name was a defective grantor trust. So this is saving a lot of estate tax. We can go back to bypass trust. We were at $11.9 million in estate tax. Now we're at $7.6 million. So just that annual gifting saved $4 million. So they should at least do that. And Cal could be gifting to a trust that benefits Shirley and the children and use Cal's exemption for that. That's called a spousal limited access trust. Jerry, anything you want to mention at this point?
No, but in the time we have left, can we skip to slide 72 to go over what you told me I would do in the beginning?
Yeah. And Jerry, we can go late. We usually run late. So I'll just mention if they gift discounted LLC interests, then we hit discounted gifting, and the estate tax goes down to 5.7. If we do an installment sale, the estate tax goes way down. So let me move that out now. And Jerry, what slide would you like me to go to?
72.
72, like the rules of 72.
Yeah. All right. So here's the thing. There's a lot that goes on in these transfers. There's discounts. There's the compounding over a long period of time. There's the grantor trust treatment. And it can get very, very confusing. So what we did is we designed a spreadsheet, which is actually in the Estate View, very simple, to illustrate how this works financially year by year in an understandable manner. So here's an example where you have a client with about $250,000 $25 million of investment assets. And what we're going to do is basically use a combination of discounts, gifts and trust, installment sales to grantor trust, and grantor trust treatment to show you how it all works in an understandable manner. And also, you have to take into account when you do an estate plan, you have to take into account the income taxes that an individual will be paying, because the income taxes that a couple will be paying depletes their net worth. And one of the problems with all the commercial programs that are out there, they don't really have any illustrations that show you how paying the income taxes on your income can actually reduce the size of your assets available by the time of death. So here's what we're going to do is the client has $225 million of investment assets. The clients are 64 and 60 years old. So you can see there. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the mortality tables for a client that is a couple that's 64 and 60 years old, their joint life expectancy is 28 years. Well, that means that we expect the surviving spouse to die at age 88. But the problem is, by just looking at the mortality assumptions basically mean for that couple, 50% of them will still be alive when they reach their 28-year life expectancy age. So when you think about this, you have to carry out your financial projections beyond the life expectancy. So what we do here is I see another table where I can add another 7 or 8 years to life expectancy. So here's what we do. The couple keeps, out of the 225 million, they keep 112 million in their own name. They put the rest of it, the other 113 million, into a family limited partnership and take a discount on the value of their family limited partnership interest. And I'm going to assume a conservative 25% valuation discount. So the first thing is when I put the 113 million into the family limited partnership, I have one partnership, no, go back. They have one partnership interest that has a $13 million contribution. I'm going to discount it down by 25%. So the discounted value of the limited partnership interest is $10 million. And what I'm going to do is make a gift of $10 million to a grantor trust for the benefit of my spouse and my descendants, okay? The remaining $100 million of partnership interest, which I discounted down to 75 million, I'm going to sell it to this trust for an interest-only promissory note for 20 years. And the rate of interest, I'm going to assume, when I did this projection, the interest rates were a little higher, but it still illustrates everything. So I'm going to assume that I'm selling an asset, 75 million principal at annual interest at 3.35% and for 20 years, and at the end of 20 years. So and now you also have to assume what kind of rate of return they're earning on their investment assets. And I assumed in this situation a 6.42% rate of return. And I said out of that rate of return, about 30% of the income will be capital gains and about 70% of the income will be ordinary income. And so, all right, now, so in this situation, the first thing you want to do is communicate to the client within 5 minutes the first question they want answered. And when you show them a technique, what is the first thing they want to know, Alan? Go to the next slide.
How much money will it save me?
Right.
And why does it cost so much?
Okay, well, that's the second question. So basically, you show if you do this technique and the surviving spouse lives to say 95, I can essentially save you $220 million of estate taxes. And what's the second question the client asks?
Why does it cost so much, Jerry?
Oh, so I basically say, well, we're going to do this for $50,000. They say, that's a hell of a lot of money. But then I say, would you invest $50,000 to make $220 million some 25, 30 years from now? And the client would say, of course, that's a great investment. I say, what a coincidence. That's our legal fee. All right. All right. So the first thing you want to show the client is what would they end up with using all those assumptions if they did no tax planning. Now, go back to the previous slide. I also have to put in at the very bottom their estimated living expenses. And that's going to increase. So all these financial factors need to be taken into account. So let's go on to going to the next slide. Next one. Keep going. Go on. Go. Senior with no tax planning. Keep going. Next slide. Where is it? All right, next. All right, so here's their situation. They started with 226 million. There's their income that they earned from it. There's the income taxes that they have to pay on their ordinary income and capital gain. So you see that in the first year on their 226, they earned 10,156,000. You see that their total income taxes were about 6.7 million. So their net cash after taxes is 7.7 million. With 2 million of living expenses, they really increased their net worth by 5.7 million. And so what you do is you basically show that every year their net worth is going to increase. Their investment portfolio increases, so they're getting more income, they're paying more income taxes, and you also want to show their living expenses increasing. So at the end of 35 years, when the youngest couple is like 95 years old, there would be $563 million exposed to estate tax. And if you look at the summary sheet, you would see that 563 million of estate tax exposure would at 40% would be $220 million of estate taxes, and the kids would net 342 million. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. Where is it? Keep going. Senior with tax plan. Where happened to it, Alan?
Page 81.
Senior with tax plan is on slide 80. All right. Now, oh no, that's the trust with the tax plan. Go to slide 82.
Got it.
All right. So now in the top right-hand corner, you see senior kept $112 million. And they also made a gift of a $10 million partnership interest, which was really worth 13 million, and sold a $75 million partnership interest that was really worth 100 million. So in the first year, they're going to get interest on that promissory note of $2,520,000. Okay. Now, interestingly, they had $112 million of retained assets. So the next column shows you the income they received on the retained assets. And the next column shows you the income taxes they pay on the retained assets. Then we have another column that says tax on the trust's income, because in the magic of what we call estate planning, this is a grantor trust. And even though the seniors are not entitled to any of the assets or the income of the grantor trust, they have to pay the income taxes on the trust income. So you see that the income taxes they pay on the trust income, because remember, the trust has about $113 million of assets, and that's earning income. So essentially, you take that into account, and after you take into account the interest payment they're receiving, the income they're getting from their retained assets, the income taxes they pay on their retained income, and the income taxes they pay on the trust income, they actually have net cash after everything of $3 million. And then they have $2 million of living expenses. So what you see in this situation is their net worth increased by about $1 million. Now, go back to slide 80. Here's the trust. And here's something you see in the trust. It started with 113 million of assets, and then you see what it earned on the 113 million. The income tax, and it doesn't pay any income taxes. The seniors pay the income taxes. So the trust only expense is the interest it has to pay on the promissory note. So here's something interesting. The trust net worth has increased by $4,756,000. Not bad. Now, here's something interesting. Most people, when they set up irrevocable life insurance trusts, they usually fund the irrevocable life insurance trust with annual exclusion gifts. Well, that's $15,000 per donee. They do the split gift election, it's $30,000. So there's a limit as to how much life insurance a trust can buy if they're only going to rely on gifts into the trust or annual exclusion gifts. However, you see in the first year, the trust has a surplus of $4,756,000. Well, guess what? That's the trust money. So if the trust wanted to pay $700,000 of premiums in that at the end of the first year, it's out of the trust's own money. So the key here is very simple, that because the trust can pay the premiums in almost unlimited amounts out of its own income that it earns after payment of all its obligations. Now, what is interesting is you see over time, the trust is earning, say, 6%, but it's only paying 3% on the promissory note. So essentially, the trust is borrowing money at 3% and earning, say, 6%. The trust keeps the difference. Because, see, the trust is paying interest on the borrowed funds at about 3.5%, and it's earning like 6.5%. So the trust keeps the difference. We call that the financial leverage. So every year, while the note is outstanding, the trust, the interest rate is fixed, but every year the trust assets increase in value. So during the 20-year term of the note, you see in year 20, the trust earns 17 million, but only has to pay 2.5 million of interest. But oh, by the way, in year 20, the trust has to pay the note back. So you see in year 20, the trust ending principal decreases by the 75 million of principal they pay back on the note. Now here is what's very interesting. The trust no longer has to pay the seniors any money. They pay back the interest on the note, they pay back the note. The trust at the end of year 20 is $220 million. That still earns income. And you see from years 20 to 35, the trust keeps earning income. But look, the trust doesn't pay any income taxes. So essentially, after go back to slide 80, Alan.
Yeah, sorry. It's got a mind of its own.
Okay. So you see that even after the note is paid, as grantor trust treatment continues, the trust keeps earning lots and lots of money, but doesn't pay any income taxes. So at the end of 35 years, $563 million is in the trust without any gift tax, without any estate tax, and without any generation skipping tax. And the client says, "How, boy, this is unbelievable." And you say, "Wait a minute." As Joe Heller would say, there's a catch 22. So let's go to slide 82. This is senior. And remember, with $226 million, I had the seniors only commit half of it to the estate plan. I had them keep $112 million. And you think, why did you have them keep $112 million? Well, as you look at the spreadsheets here, you see in the first few years, 112 million increases to about 116 million at the end of year 7. Sounds good. But remember something. There's a huge expense that the trust has to pay. I'm sorry, that the grantors have to pay where they don't get anything. And that's the trusts, the income taxes, the grantors have to pay on the trust income under the grantor trust rules. And you see over the term of that note how those income taxes increase. And you see when those income taxes on the trust income increase, like in year 20, the income taxes on the trust income are like almost $8 million. So what you see here is there's a point in time where I'm depleting their remaining principal. But fortunately, in year 20, they're getting a $70 million payment. So they now have $156 million. But they still have to pay income taxes on the trust income. They're no longer getting any interest on the note, and they got a $75 million principal payment. So their net worth went from 87 million to 156 million. So let's look what happens each year after the note is paid. They got 156 million. They get the income that the 156 million. They pay the income taxes on the income that they receive. They pay the income taxes on the trust income. And you see that, oh my God, there's a shortfall. Then you look in their living expenses, which you have to take into account, and you see from year 20, their net worth goes to from 156 to 152, and every year that the income in the trust increases, we call it the burn, keeps burning their assets. And here's the nice thing. If the surviving spouse dies at age 35 years from now, all that's exposed to estate tax is $428,000. The perfect estate plan. But the client says, wait a minute. I see in year 30, I'm down to 92 million. Enough is enough. I don't want to pay any more income taxes on the trust income. Well, the key here is you basically turn off grantor trust status so we can stop the burn. But what you have to do is illustrate all these factors in a spreadsheet. It becomes easier to illustrate this if the client can visualize the numbers of what happens each and every year. And so that is really what Alan's son-in-law did for us a number of years ago in developing estate tools, right, Alan?
Yeah, so here is the estate view installment sale calculator. And we hope within, let me resize it. We hope within a few weeks or days even that this is going to be an exportable spreadsheet. So Jerry, I don't know if you recall, but you designed this. So here on the top left-hand side, the client has 25 million in assets. They're spending 800,000 a year. We can cut that back. Most people don't spend that much except on legal fees.
Well, the nice thing about it is that the clients can tell you the numbers to use. And the clients will say, hey, show it where I'm earning an 8% rate of return. Or the clients will say, show it when I'm earning a 3% rate of return. So basically, what this allows you to do is work with the client to financially design the entire estate plan. That's the beauty of this. It's an ongoing process.
Right, but we really like to make sure the client understands what the probable result is going to be each year. We do allow for toggling off grantor trust status, where the trust would begin to pay its own taxes. If that's possible, you can look at that. You can also make the note conventional or self-canceling by having a higher interest rate and making it self-canceling. So again, if you're one of our Estate View subscribers, we'll be sending you a new edition pretty soon with this spreadsheet being exportable. So then you can send it to the client as their own Excel spreadsheet and use it from that. I wanted Jerry to also show you what our new feature is on Estate View, and that is, as you can see, I've put this information about Cal and Shirley. And before I show you the new feature, I just want, for those of you who are not tax novices, you probably understood half of what we said today, and probably none of the jokes. But what we can do with these people is, without installment sale planning, you see that they have a pretty high tax situation. So in this module of Estate View, I can just say, well, if they could make a fairly large gift to a trust right now, that would reduce their estate tax. But why don't I just, if you watch what I'm doing here, why don't I put some assets in a trust? So that would be the sale value, but without discount. So I could put 3 million of assets in a trust and make a very small gift to the trust $250,000 gift to the trust. $3 million of assets go into an LLC. I use a 20% discount or a 25% discount. So I'm selling those assets for a note, and the estate tax goes to zero when you do this installment sale. So I didn't do a good job of explaining it. Also, there's another way to look at all this. If you go to the timeline, you see that the present situation of this client, if they only do the bypass trust, they're going to, any given year of the second death, the red is the estate tax. Whereas if they do the annual gifting, it's less, but if they do the installment sale, it's that much. There's no estate tax. Now, for those of you who want to remember what we did, I'm going to click Generate Client Letter, and the computer has now drafted a letter to the client. It's a Word document, and it is opened here. So this letter, which I'll be sending to all you participants, gives you all the inputs we just did and shows you each of the pictures with an explanation. So you have that. So Jerry, can I go ahead and tell you some of the audience questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. What do you mean by half are still living when you talk about life expectancy?
Okay, it's interesting. The standard mortality tables basically look at the probability of you living from year to year. And so for example, in the standard mortality tables, they estimate that a person age 70 has a life expectancy of exactly 14 years. Well, if you look at the mortality tables, the 14 years is the average of the US population as a whole. So they say anybody age 70 in the United States today has a life expectancy of 14 years. But the mortality tables show you that there's a possibility someone age 70 will live to 86, 90, 95, 100. So what they do is, it basically says, what that means is, out of everybody age 70 today, half of them will have died by age 84, and the other half will still be living at age 84. So you can't, so basically the mortality tables, it's an average of everybody in the United States. And therefore, that's what I mean. That means, and our clients tend to not be the United States population as a whole. They happen to be a little bit, they have good health insurance, and it is not unusual for someone age 70 to live today well into their 90s. So that's what I mean. So therefore, when someone says your life expectancy is 14 years, it doesn't mean you're going to be dead in 14 years. It means there's a 50% probability you'll still be alive in 14 years.
Jerry, here's another great question from Mary. Somebody has a $30 million Roth IRA. Will it be subject to estate tax? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
If yes, what is the best way to minimize estate tax and yet have the Roth grow tax-free?
Well, the problem is can I give the Roth IRA by gift or bequest or one estate planning technique to someone else? And unfortunately, the Roth IRA rules are a little bit complex. Is Brandon on the line?
No.
Okay, because I don't remember that exactly. But there's restrictions. And the question is, if I gift the Roth IRA today at its current value, and I know it's going to grow, because does the income tax-free nature carry over to the person who receives the gift or bequest of the Roth IRA? Alan?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I have a Roth IRA with $100,000 in it. I know that I'm going to live another 20 years, and I expect it to triple in value, say from 100,000 to 300,000. So I make a gift of it today to my child of 100,000. And does the income tax treatment still apply if I give my Roth IRA to someone else?
It's like you terminated your Roth IRA. It's like you pulled the assets out. I don't think you can transfer ownership of a Roth IRA.
That's right. In other words, as soon as you dispose of your Roth IRA, the income tax free treatment is eliminated. So
yeah, Brandon and I just advised a family to liquidate a $5 million Roth so that we could do estate tax planning for it. The client had a fairly short life expectancy, and it involves a self-canceling installment note, and we just felt like the income tax savings from the Roth had to be secondary to the estate tax savings. And we ran a lot of spreadsheets and showed them the scenarios, and the clients were pretty sophisticated and they did agree. But I think most planners aren't going to do that.
But the key, what Alan's saying is paying the income taxes on the buildup today could be less than the estate tax savings if I disposed of it today. All right.
Right. Jerry, Vince Lackner has a lot of good comments. I think the three of us should set up a call and go through his suggestions, which are
Is Vince on the call here?
Vince is on the call.
I got a question.
I don't know how to unmute him.
Is it snowing in Pittsburgh right now?
Okay. I'll bet it is. Jerry, here's another one. Do you think that they'll ever do away with stepped up income tax basis?
Probably not. Because there's a cost to get a income tax-free step up in basis at death. And people don't realize it's not free. Suppose I fully utilized my gift and estate tax exemption, and anything I have left will be subject to estate tax. And I have a $50 million asset in a startup company where I was the founder. So my income tax basis in that $50 million of public stock where I'm a founder of the company is zero. And I want to get an income tax-free step up in basis at death by eliminating $50 million of gain. And if I can eliminate $50 million of gain, I've eliminated the 25% capital gains tax on 50 million. So I've saved $12.5 million of income taxes. However, what is the estate tax cost by including $50 million in my gross estate at 40% estate tax rate? Can you do the math in your head, Alan?
No, but it's a lot.
40% of 50 million is
$20 million.
$20 million. So essentially, am I willing to pay $20 million of estate taxes to save $12.5 million of income taxes?
Yeah.
However, suppose I have $50 million of real estate with a zero basis, subject to a $40 million liability, and I die owning that piece of real estate. The equity exposed to estate tax is $10 million. So I pay 40% estate tax on the 10 million, because that's the equity in the real estate. I have real estate that I leave to my kids with a 50 million value, subject to a 40 million liability. However, my income tax, the estate's income tax basis is $50 million. So in that situation, when you have encumbered real estate, what's included in the gross estate is far less than the income tax gain that is eliminated. So the only asset that really is favorable for this benefit of tax-free step-up in basis at death is encumbered real estate, where the equity is far less than the market value. So,
Jerry, thank you very much. Are you going to join us again, and when?
I don't know. We'll talk about that next week. Okay.
Okay. Thanks to everybody for participating in today's program. We enjoyed it quite a bit. Jerry, thank you very much for all that you've done for so many estate planners, so many students, so many tax lawyers. You're just a pillar of the estate planning community for sure, and an all-star thinker. If anyone has any questions, comments, or suggestions, please just let us know. We're always ready, willing, and able to answer questions or dodge them, depending upon whether we know the answer or not. And may the rest of your day be a wonderful, wonderful weekend. You will be receiving in approximately 1 hour a copy of this video. You can watch it as many times as you want, and then later go see it on YouTube. But hopefully you have better things to do. Thank you again, Jerry.
Take care.